When we think about healthy foods, few get a better reputation than nuts. Almonds, cashews, pistachios, they're often the go-to snacks for people trying to eat cleaner, live longer, and maybe even reverse some of the damage done by years of ultra-processed eating. And in many ways, that reputation is well earned. Nuts are rich in unsaturated fats, fiber, minerals, plant protein, and even compounds like phytosterols that support heart health. But here's the twist. Not all nuts are created equal. And this is important. Not all nuts are the best choice for people over 60. In fact, in some cases, certain popular nuts may be contributing to subtle but significant issues: elevated blood pressure, impaired blood sugar regulation, digestive discomfort, even unnecessary weight gain. And these problems aren't just theoretical. They show up in the clinical literature and in the real lives of older adults trying their best to age well. So today, we're going to talk about 3 popular nuts that might be working against your long-term health goals, especially as you age. Not because nuts are bad. We're well past that kind of black and white nutrition thinking, but because what you need after 60 is different from what you needed at 30. Your metabolism has shifted, muscle maintenance is harder, digestion slows, insulin sensitivity drops, and your nutrient needs, especially around protein, fiber, sodium, and magnesium, all begin to change. Here's the good news: we're not here to demonize food. In fact, we'll look at why these specific nuts might be problematic, and more importantly, how to make smarter swaps that protect your energy, your muscles, and your mind. We'll talk about one nut that's sneakily high in sodium and why that matters for heart health. We'll look at another that's spiking blood sugar more than you'd expect. And we'll explore a third that's technically natural but ultra-processed in how it's prepared, often coated in oils or flavors that undercut its benefits. Throughout, we'll stay grounded in the research, including large cohort studies like EPIC and NHINES, clinical trials looking at nut intake and cardiometabolic risk, and behavioral studies on satiety and snacking habits. But we'll also zoom out to the practical level: what do you actually put in your pantry, and how can you eat in a way that supports strength, cognition, and vitality well into your 70s and beyond. So if you've ever reached for a handful of mixed nuts thinking, this has to be a healthy choice, this episode is for you. The truth is more nuanced, and that nuance can make all the difference, not just in how you snack, but in how you age. Ready to dive in? Let's start with the first nut that may surprise you: cashews. Now, cashews are often lumped into the healthy category alongside almonds and walnuts, and for good reason. They contain some beneficial nutrients, including magnesium, copper, and plant-based fats. But here's where things get tricky, especially for older adults. Cashews are one of the highest sugar nuts. Yes, naturally occurring sugar, not added, but it still matters. A 1-ounce serving of cashews contains nearly 2 grams of sugar, which may not sound like a lot, but it's significantly higher than most other nuts. For comparison, almonds, pecans, and walnuts clock in closer to less than 1 gram per ounce. Why does this matter? As we age, we become more insulin resistant. Our cells don't respond to insulin as efficiently, meaning that blood sugar spikes can linger longer and do more damage over time. Research from the Whitehall 7 study and numerous diabetes cohort studies have shown that older adults often exhibit reduced glucose tolerance even in the absence of diagnosed diabetes. That means even small sources of sugar, especially when eaten frequently, can nudge blood sugar into a higher range day after day. Cashews also have a higher glycemic index than you might expect for a nut. While most nuts have a GI in the range of 0 to 20, cashews can reach up to 25 to 27 depending on how they're prepared. Again, not alarming in isolation, but we're talking about patterns, not panic. If you're snacking on cashews daily, thinking they're a safe, low-carb food, they may be subtly undermining your blood sugar control, especially if paired with other carbohydrates or eaten without fiber or protein. And then there's portion size. Cashews are particularly easy to overeat. They're creamy, a little sweet, and often roasted in oil, all of which makes them more palatable, even addictive. Behavioral research from the Cornell Food and Brand Lab has shown that hyper-palatable foods high in fat, sugar, or salt are more likely to lead to mindless eating, especially in older adults who may be snacking out of habit, boredom, or emotional reasons. Now, this isn't about restriction, it's about awareness. If cashews are a staple in your diet and you're noticing blood sugar fluctuations, energy crashes, or even brain fog, it might be worth experimenting. Try swapping in nuts with lower glycemic impact, like walnuts or almonds, and pair them with fiber-rich foods like a small apple or some celery sticks. That slows digestion and blunts the glucose spike. And here's one more thing: magnesium. Cashews do contain magnesium, But almonds and pumpkin seeds contain significantly more, and magnesium is one of the most important minerals for older adults. It supports muscle function, blood pressure, and glucose metabolism. So again, it's not about banning cashews. It's about making a trade-off based on what you need most now, not what worked in your 30s or 40s. So if you love cashews, you don't have to give them up entirely, but be mindful of how often you're reaching for them, and consider diversifying your nut intake to support better blood sugar stability and long-term metabolic resilience. What's one swap you could make this week that supports your energy instead of draining it? Let's move on to the second nut on our list, one that might actually be raising your blood pressure more than you realize: pistachios. Now, pistachios on their own, raw or dry, roasted, unsalted, can be a terrific choice. They're rich in potassium, vitamin B6, and have one of the highest levels of plant protein among nuts. So in theory, pistachios should be a win, right? But here's the problem: most of the pistachios sold and eaten today are heavily salted. In fact, if you look at the packaging in the snack aisles, especially those convenience or grab and go varieties, you'll find that many contain over 120 milligrams of sodium per ounce. And some flavored pistachios, they hit 200 milligrams or more. That's nearly 10% of the recommended daily limit from a single handful. Now let's pause here and consider something important. Sodium itself isn't the enemy. We need it for nerve function, fluid balance, and muscle contraction. But in older adults, the equation changes. As we age, our kidneys become less efficient at excreting excess sodium, which makes us more vulnerable to sodium-induced hypertension or high blood pressure, and that's not a minor concern. According to the CDC, nearly 2/3 of Americans over 60 have hypertension. It's one of the strongest predictors of stroke, heart failure, and even cognitive decline. What's especially tricky is that we often don't feel when our blood pressure is creeping up. It's a silent process. So it's easy to reach for salted pistachios, thinking they're a healthy snack, while unknowingly contributing to the very issue we're trying to prevent. One randomized controlled trial, the DAS sodium trial, found that even modest reductions in sodium intake set from around 300-400 mg to 200-300 mg per day led to clinically meaningful drops in blood pressure. The effect was even more pronounced in people over 55. In other words, small changes, big impact. And here's the behavioral piece: flavored or salted nuts tend to override satiety cues. That's a fancy way of saying they taste good enough that we keep eating, even when we're no longer hungry. A study from the British Journal of Nutrition found that people ate 35% more salted nuts than unsalted ones simply because of the enhanced taste. So what's the alternative? Try switching to unsalted dry, roasted pistachios and portion out a small serving, not from the bag but into a small bowl. Even better, pair them with some fresh fruit like pear slices, or mix them into a salad with arugula and balsamic vinegar. That way you're getting flavor, complexity, but not from added sodium. And if you really miss the salt, sprinkle a tiny pinch of coarse sea salt yourself. That way you control the amount, not the food processor. Also worth noting, pistachios still contain a decent amount of potassium, which helps counterbalance sodium's effect on blood pressure. So they're not off limits, but they're best consumed mindfully, especially if you're already managing blood pressure with medication or noticing signs like swelling, fatigue, or headaches. Sometimes the issue isn't the nut itself, but how it's been processed and how often we eat it without thinking. If you've found this helpful so far and you're into evidence-based health without the fear-mongering, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel. And more importantly, helps us keep bringing you science-backed tools you can trust. Now, we're going to look at a third nut, one that's technically plant-based but often acts more like a processed snack food than a whole one. And for seniors trying to preserve metabolic health and muscle, this one can be a real stumbling block. The third nut we need to talk about, and this one might surprise you, is the flavored or oil roasted almond. Now, almonds in their natural form are fantastic. They're packed with vitamin E, magnesium, and fiber. They've been shown in clinical trials, like the PRDIMED study out of Spain, to support heart health and lower LDL cholesterol. In fact, almonds were a key part of the Mediterranean diet that reduced cardiovascular events by over 30% in high-risk adults. So where's the problem? It's not the almond, it's what we've done to it. Walk down any grocery aisle today and you'll see an entire wall of healthy snacks featuring almonds, but they're almost never plain. They're smokehouse flavored, honey roasted, sriracha lime, or dusted with chocolate, sea salt, or wasabi crunch. These flavorings aren't just for fun. They're part of a deliberate design to increase consumption. They're processed to be what food scientists call hyper-palatable, triggering our brain's reward system in ways that bypass our natural sense of fullness. Let's break this down. A 1-ounce serving of plain raw almonds has about 160 calories. Add flavorings, oil, and sweet coatings. You're easily at 200 calories. And here's the kicker. Research from the Yale Rudd Center shows that these small changes in calorie density are often undetected by our brains. We don't compensate by eating less later. We just eat more overall. But there's another layer here, especially for seniors: inflammatory seed oils. Many of these flavored almonds are roasted in oils like canola, soybean, or sunflower, oils that are high in omega-6 fatty acids. Now, omega-6 isn't inherently bad, we need it, but our modern diets already provide far more than we evolved to handle, and the imbalance between omega-6 and omega-3 can promote low-grade inflammation. That chronic inflammation, especially in older adults, is linked to everything from muscle wasting to insulin resistance to cognitive decline. So if your almonds are roasted in cheap oils, dusted with artificial flavors, and sweetened with hidden sugars, you've turned one of the healthiest whole foods into something that behaves more like junk food in the body. Here's a simple test: flip the bag over. Look at the ingredients. If you see more than 2 or 3 items, and those include sugar, natural flavors, or refined oils, it's not really a health food anymore. It's a processed snack dressed up as a health food. So what's the fix? Stick to raw or dry roasted almonds. These give you the full nutrient benefit without the metabolic confusion. Even better, try pairing a small handful with a high-fiber food like roasted chickpeas or popcorn for added volume and satiety. If you enjoy a little flavor, consider adding your own. A sprinkle of cinnamon and cocoa powder. Great. A tiny bit of sea salt and smoked paprika. Perfect. The point is, you're in control, not the food manufacturer. This is especially important after 60, when appetite regulation can shift and muscle preservation becomes priority 1. The last thing you want is to waste calories on flavor-enhanced snacks that keep you full just enough to skip a real meal, but not nourish enough to support muscle repair, bone strength, or brain health. So yes, almonds are still in the Health Food Hall of Fame, but like so many things in nutrition, the details matter. And small shifts, like choosing whole over flavored, can add up to a big difference in your energy, your inflammation levels, and your long-term vitality. What's one processed health food in your pantry that you could replace with a simpler version? Let's take a step back from individual nuts for a moment and talk about something bigger, something that affects not just what we eat, but how much we eat and how we think about those foods. Because here's the truth, even with the right nuts, plain almonds, raw walnuts, dry roasted pistachios, it's incredibly easy to overeat them. And for older adults, that can quietly work against your goals, especially if you're trying to preserve lean muscle, maintain a healthy weight, or manage blood sugar and inflammation. Nuts are energy dense. That's not a bad thing. It's actually part of what makes them satisfying. But it means that a small handful can pack 180 to 220 calories, often without much volume or visible fullness on the plate. In other words, it doesn't look like much, but it adds up quickly. Now, here's where psychology comes in. One of the best known studies in this area comes from Brian Wansink's team at Cornell, who ran a series of experiments showing how health high loss lead people to unconsciously overeat foods they perceive as healthy. In one study, people ate 35% more trail mix when it was labeled organic versus regular. Same calories, same ingredients, just a change in perception. This is important because when we label something a superfood or heart healthy or natural, our guard drops. We stop paying attention. We eat more, often mindlessly, and we feel justified doing it. And that can derail even the most well-intentioned eating pattern, especially in an age group that's often advised to eat more healthy fats or snack smart. And then there's the problem of snacking without satiety. A randomized trial from Purdue University looked at how different nuts affected fullness and calorie compensation. They found that while almonds and peanuts do increase satiety in the moment, people didn't actually eat less at their next meal, meaning the snack became extra, not a substitute. Now again, this doesn't mean we shouldn't eat nuts, but it does mean we have to be deliberate, especially in the context of aging metabolism, where muscle mass declines and energy needs shrink by 20 to 25% compared to younger adults. So what can you do? First, be aware of portion distortion. Measure out 1 ounce of nuts, roughly 23 almonds, or 14 walnut halves, and see what that looks like in your hand or your snack bowl. You might be surprised. Second, don't eat nuts alone. Pair them with foods that add bulk without many extra calories, like sliced veggies, popcorn, or a cup of berries. This engages more chewing, more visual volume, and a stronger satiety signal to the brain. Third, consider timing. Many older adults fall into the habit of grazing. A few nuts here, a few chips there, a bite of cheese between meals. But research on circadian rhythms and metabolism shows that calories eaten late in the day, or constantly spread throughout the day, are more likely to be stored than burned. So try consolidating your nuts into a defined snack or meal component, not a constant nibble. Finally, track how you feel. Do you feel energized after your snack, or sluggish, satisfied, or still hungry? These little moments of awareness are how behavior change starts. Because let's face it, eating well in your 60s, 70s, and 80s isn't about perfection. It's about precision. Not strict rules, but smart adjustments, the kind that work with your body as it changes, not against it. If you're enjoying this grounded, science-based approach to nutrition without hype or guilt, consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps this message reach more thoughtful eaters like you and keeps this channel going strong. Now, we'll talk about something almost no one discusses, how your gut microbiome changes with age and how the wrong kinds of nuts might be feeding the wrong bugs. Let's shift our focus to something both fascinating and deeply underappreciated, your gut microbiome. By now, you've probably heard that your gut is home to trillions of microbes, bacteria, fungi, even viruses, many of which are not just passive passengers, but active participants in your health. They help you digest food, regulate immune function, influence mood, and even shape how your body handles glucose and fat. But here's what's often missed: your gut microbiome changes as you age, and not always for the better. In younger adults, the gut tends to be more diverse, meaning more types of beneficial bacteria are present, doing different jobs. But with age, especially after 60, diversity often drops. Certain helpful species, like Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, start to decline. Meanwhile, inflammatory microbes can rise, particularly if the diet is high in processed foods, low in fiber, or lacking in plant diversity. And that's where nuts come in. But not all nuts support the gut equally. Let's take a look at macadamia nuts, which are frequently praised for their high monounsaturated fat content. They're buttery, delicious, and yes, very rich in fat. But here's the catch: they're very low in fiber, especially compared to other nuts. A 1-ounce serving of macadamias provides just 2 grams of fiber, while the same amount of almonds offers 3.5 grams, and pistachios close to 4 grams. Why does this matter? Because fiber, especially prebiotic fiber, is what your beneficial gut bacteria feed on. When they digest this fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and acetate, which reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and even help protect the lining of your gut. Without enough fiber, the microbial ecosystem starts to shift in a less favorable direction. In fact, a 2020 study published in Cell, Host, and Microbe found that older adults who consumed more plant-based, fiber-rich foods, including high-fiber nuts, had significantly more diverse microbiomes and fewer inflammatory markers like IL-6 and TNF-alpha. On the flip side, those whose diets were rich in fats but low in fermentable fiber had increased markers of inflammation and decreased microbial richness, a key predictor of frailty and even cognitive decline. Now, I want to be clear, macadamia nuts aren't bad. In fact, they've been shown to support heart health in moderation. But if you're over 60 and trying to support your gut, reduce inflammation, and maintain cognitive clarity, you want to prioritize nuts that bring both healthy fats and fermentable fiber to the table. That means thinking about variety and balance. Walnuts, for example, are rich in polyunsaturated fats and plant omega-3s and also provide probiotic compounds that nourish beneficial microbes. Pistachios are another standout. They're not only high in fiber, but also contain polyphenols, plant compounds that fuel gut bacteria and reduce oxidative stress. Here's a simple takeaway. Think of your microbiome like a garden. If you want to grow diverse, resilient plants, you need to feed the soil. And in this case, fiber is the fertilizer. The more diversity of plant foods you eat, the more resilient your gut becomes. And that shows up in everything from energy levels to inflammation to emotional well-being. So next time you're choosing a snack, ask yourself, am I feeding me or also feeding my microbes? Ideally, it should be both. And if you're dealing with any digestive discomfort, bloating, irregularity, gas, this may be your body signaling an imbalance. Before reaching for supplements or cutting out whole food groups, start by adjusting the fiber quality in your diet. Nuts can help if you choose the right ones. We've talked about sugar, sodium, oil, fiber, and even your microbiome. But now it's time to connect the dots and ask, how do you actually use this information to eat better without getting overwhelmed? Because let's be honest, it's easy to get bogged down in the details. One day you hear cashews are good. The next they're bad for blood sugar. Pistachios have potassium, but too much salt. Almonds are healthy until they're honey, roasted in seed oil. And macadamias, delicious, but not exactly gut-friendly. So how do we make sense of it all? It starts with a mindset shift. Instead of thinking in terms of good vs bad foods, think in terms of fit. Does this food fit my body, my needs, and my goals right now? That's one of the biggest takeaways from long-term nutrition studies like diet. The year-long Stanford trial I led that compared low-carb and low-fat diets in over 600 adults. What we found, it wasn't the macronutrient ratio that predicted success. It was the quality of the food and whether participants could stick with it. That same principle applies here. The best nut for you is the one that supports your current needs, your muscle mass, your digestion, your energy, and yes, your enjoyment. So here are 3 practical principles to guide your nut choices going forward. 1. Prioritize minimally processed versions. That means raw, dry, roasted, or lightly seasoned nuts. Skip the ones with seed oils, sugar, artificial flavors, or coatings that belong more in a dessert than a health food. Think of the nut as the main ingredient, not just a delivery vehicle for flavorings. 2. Think whole food context. Nuts work best when they're part of a meal or balanced snack, not just something you graze on. Combine them with whole fruit, veggies, or whole grains to enhance satiety, blunt glucose spikes, and create a more complete nutritional profile. A handful of walnuts with oatmeal. Great. Almonds tossed into a quinoa salad. Perfect. 3. Adjust by season of life. If you're 65 and focused on maintaining muscle and brain function, nuts rich in omega-3s and fiber, like walnuts and pistachios, are better choices than low-fiber, high-fat options like macadamias or cashews. If you're managing blood pressure, steer clear of salted nuts. If you're watching blood sugar, skip the sweet glazed ones. The key is personalization, and you don't need to overhaul your diet overnight. Start with one shift. Maybe you swap that afternoon handful of honey, roasted almonds for a mix of raw walnuts and fresh blueberries. Or trade your late night salted cashew snack for a small serving of plain pistachios and chamomile tea. Track how you feel: energy, digestion, mental clarity. These are your body's feedback systems. And over time, those subtle signals become your best guide. Here's another subtle but powerful tool: create a visible food environment. Behavioral research shows that we eat what we see. So make the better nuts easy to access. Put them in a clear jar on the counter. Hide the overly processed ones at the back of the pantry. Or better yet, don't buy them. Make the healthy default the easy choice. Because aging well isn't about following a perfect diet. It's about making dozens of small, smart decisions every week. Decisions that honor your body's needs and your values. So, let's recap what we've covered. Cashew sweet and creamy, but a sneaky blood sugar spike. Pistachios heart healthy in theory, but often loaded with salt. Flavored almonds nutrient rich, but frequently drowned in seed oils and sugar. Macadamias tasty and high fat, but light on fiber and not feeding your microbiome. And yet, none of these are off limits. They're just better in some contexts than others. With better awareness, you can make more intentional, more nourishing choices. So let's bring this full circle. We started with a question that might have sounded a little provocative. Should seniors stop eating these 3 popular nuts? And what we uncovered was more nuanced than a headline can capture. Cashews, pistachios, and flavored almonds, even macadamias, aren't inherently bad. But for older adults navigating changes in metabolism, muscle mass, blood sugar regulation, and gut health, context is everything. Here's what we learned: cashews are naturally sweet and easy to overeat, and they may raise blood sugar more than you'd expect. Pistachios, unless unsalted, can quietly push sodium intake higher than is ideal. Not great for blood pressure or kidney function. Flavored or oil roasted almonds blur the line between whole food and processed snack, especially when roasted in inflammatory oils or coated in sugar. And macadamias, though heart healthy in moderation, are light on fiber and might not support your aging gut microbiome the way walnuts or pistachios can. But the bigger message here is this: as we age, we don't just need fewer calories. We need smarter calories. Every bite becomes more important. Not because we're trying to eat less, but because we're trying to nourish more deeply, more deliberately, more in tune with what our bodies actually need. This isn't about giving up your favorite foods. It's about learning to ask better questions. Instead of, is this healthy? Try, what does this food do for me? Right now, at this stage of life, does it help me preserve muscle, regulate blood sugar, support my gut, and feel good after eating? And if not, what small swap could move me in a better direction? So here's your gentle challenge this week. Choose one nut to upgrade. Maybe you switch from flavored almonds to dry roasted. Maybe you cut back on salted pistachios and try raw walnuts for a few days. Or maybe you build a snack plate, not just a handful of nuts, but something more complete: a piece of fruit, a few veggie sticks, and some protein alongside. Track how it feels. Not just physically, but emotionally. Empowering, annoying, easy, insightful, that reflection, your lived experience, is as important as any study we cite here. If you found this helpful, we'd love for you to subscribe, not because of the algorithm, but because we're building something here, a community that values science without fear, nutrition without shame, and aging with strength, clarity, and self-respect. So if that sounds like your kind of tribe, come along. Leave a comment, share what you're learning, and let's keep growing together. Until next time, eat well, not perfectly, but wisely.